there is a NASA physicist. His name was Friedemann Freund. So what he had concluded and proven in his lab experiments was that igneous rock, when it is put under stress, it emits these positive Hall charge carriers that shoot up to the surface. So you've got and he said that the Earth, the lithosphere, when it's put under stress, turns into a battery. So we actually have a potential battery under our feet. So the purpose for the pyramids, in my opinion, was to actually attract the electrons from that battery and radiate them out wirelessly.
I'd like to welcome to the show Christopher Dunn. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing fine, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing great, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I am so
My
excited
pleasure.
to talk to
My
you
pleasure.
about your work, your book, Giza, the Tesla Connection, and your work that you've done over a few years now. You've been doing this, a couple years.
Yeah,
That
just a
you've been
few.
working, just a few. So my first question is, what drew you? What's the initial thing that drew you into your curiosity about the Great Pyramid and the work that you've been doing?
Well, I think the what started it all was buying a rather expensive book at the time. It was about $20, but it was Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter
Mhm.
Tompkins, and I saw it in the bookstore in 1977. Made the purchase, took it home, started reading it. Well, I was involved with a group that at that time that we were discussing philosophy, world philosophies, different religions, and ideologies. But as usual, in a group like that, people would talk about Egypt and the pyramids because that seems to, be where it all kind of points to. And so that's why I bought the book, because of my interest in Egypt and also interest in the pyramids. Having said that, I should add that also I've had a fascination for Egypt for a long time. My brother-in-law is Egyptian, and so just having that connection and also a passion for learning at the time kind of drew me in, and that was like the rabbit hole that sucked me in and kept me there for over 40 years.
Now, what was the moment that you, during all your research and your fascination, going down the rabbit hole, as they say,
Yeah.
of Egyptology and the Great Pyramids and the mysteries of all of it? At what point, what was the thing that said, "Wait a minute, is the Great Pyramid not a tomb?"
Yeah. Well, that seemed to be a central theme in Tompkins' book, is that he introduced a lot of researchers who historically had been to Egypt and done research and were actually questioning the tomb theory and trying to come to terms with that, but at the same time suggesting maybe that the pyramid was built for other purposes. So just the question mark on top of the Great Pyramid was like there was no answer, no definitive answers to the question at the
Mhm.
time. And so for me, being involved in manufacturing and being very familiar with machines, there's an aspect to his book that resonated with me, and that was the precision with which the Great Pyramid was built. And so it was kind of like a natural for me to begin to identify with a lot of the features of the Great Pyramid, and ultimately. The light bulb went off above my head, and so it was like, but basically, I would say that foundationally, it was the consideration of how cultures come together and engage in very, very large projects. Because I don't think anybody could deny that building the Great Pyramid is a huge, huge task and a huge project, and so it's kind of like what motivates people to build something like that. You know, I think on the side of academia, the motivation is kind of hinged on the whims of a particular leader. And certainly, if we look into history, we can see where there have been powerful leaders who have commissioned tremendous structures. And so, you know, that seems to be a reason that is satisfactory to a lot of people. To me, it was actually the design of the pyramid, the interior spaces, the shafts, the chambers, and the passageways inside the Great Pyramid resembled more a machine than they did a place where people would actually go into for any activities or non-activities like being a tomb or something like that. And then examining what Egyptologists are arguing were the reason for some of these features. They didn't seem to add up to me and a lot of other people. And I think even now, there's so many questions about the Great Pyramid and the tomb theory that a lot of people are just abandoning it, particularly the Egyptians, because, you know, in the years that I had spent studying and writing and talking about it, I targeted the Egyptian engineers to take a look at their artifacts in a similar way that I was, and then they were actually coming up with the same conclusion that these structures, whether you're talking about pyramids, temples, the statuary, obelisks, things of that nature, they were the result of an advanced civilization. The tools that it would take to actually replicate them do not exist in the archaeological record, and they were more advanced than what we give them credit for.
Let me ask you about the tomb theory. That's not even an Egyptian theory, to my understanding. Wasn't it one of the original British explorers that I guess that kind of came up with that idea? Am I wrong on that, or where did it come from?
Yeah, I think that I mean it's kind of murky in a way. Uh, I think the Egyptians have their own history, but
Sure.
and certainly their understanding of the culture that built the pyramids and other structures in Egypt seems to suggest that they're far older than uh, what Western scholars have said they were. So you have a situation where Western Egyptologists and scholars have gone into Egypt uh, and written the history of Egypt that fits within the timeline and the construct that had already existed in the Western world, where the Greeks were the first really advanced civilization, then the Romans, and then the
Right.
Europeans, and you know, technology is kind of diffused throughout the planet. Uh, the English, you know, the Industrial Revolution, and then the Americans developing the technology even further, and then it just spreads around the Pacific Rim. I mean, that seems to have been the path of the spread of technology throughout the planet. But but the Egyptians essentially were seen as not as advanced as the Greeks. Yet the Greeks learned a lot from the Egyptians. And the structures, if you examine them from a manufacturing perspective, the structures in Egypt have the hallmark of the use of advanced methods, even advanced machines to cut shapes, very precise shapes, contours, precision surfaces in igneous rock like granite. And so my research focused on not just the Great Pyramid, but also evidence of machining and identifying certain artifacts that would could not have been made by hand. They had to have had some mechanical intervention in order to replicate them.
The precision of the Great Pyramid, and not only the precision of the construction of it, but the alignment astrologically is so precise that a primitive or a quote unquote lesser civilization than us shouldn't have never been able to do anything like that, let alone, I mean, if we tried to do something like that today with all our computers and sophistication, it would be nearly impossible to do something like that, regardless of the cost of it. The cost is
Right,
astronomical. You
right.
couldn't do something like that with the cost. But let's say we had all the money in the world. Do you think humans today could achieve not only the structure on the outside of the Great Pyramid, but the precise nature of the rooms inside, and then also align them perfectly to the stars?
Yes, I mean the remarkable thing about the Great Pyramid is its relationship to the Earth and to the universe in effect, because you have a structure that uh, is on the 29th 29th degree parallel plus
Mhm.
some, and then it's aligned within 3 minutes of a degree of true north. Um, it covers 13 acres, and the base of the pyramid was level within 7/8 of an inch over 13 acres. And so if you compare that to what our current standards are in terms of foundations for building, in around 1978, 79, I consulted with a civil engineer where I was living about the code for laying foundations, and he told me that the code is 20 thousandths of an inch per foot. So 20 thousandths of an inch, 0.020 inch, is about the thickness of a thumbnail.
Mhm.
And so per foot, if you extrapolate that across the 13 acres, today a building that size, it could be off about 15 inches and still be in spec. And here you have one from thousands of years ago that has maintained a precision of 7/8 of an inch, which is remarkable. I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable. But that's not all. You have a structure that had casing stones on it that were measured to be within 10 thousandths of an inch. That's half the thickness of a thumbnail. So all of these features of the pyramid, inside and out, speak of very, very a high order of precision. And it's very reasonable to conclude that it looks like a machine. It had the precision of a machine, only on the scale of acres. So I concluded that it had to have been a machine. The question then was, what kind of machine? What did it do?
Right,
And
exactly.
when you talk about culture,
Mhm.
and when you talk about how you may relate to a certain culture, we may speak different languages, and we may have different beliefs in terms of, the existence of the soul or spirit, or what happens to you after you die. But there's one thing that every engineer has in common, is just pure engineering. So it's kind of like, whether you are doing engineering in England, in America, Australia, wherever in the world, Egypt, when you speak to a fellow engineer, you're talking the same language. And so, it's kind of like, well, if we want to identify, if we want to connect, with the ancient Egyptians, the culture that built the Great Pyramid. The best way to do that would be to communicate or to recognize their engineering excellence, and and uh, and then when you compare their engineering excellence with our own, I am not saying a lot. I'm not saying that everything that they did we cannot do today. I've never said that. There's a lot of people that do, but that usually people who say that really don't know what modern engineers are capable of doing, which is, they do a pretty good job and take on some enormous tasks. So when it comes to communicating and information, you communicate that through your work, through what you do, not necessarily what you say, because what you say can be misinterpreted. There's very little room for misinterpretation of a perfectly flat surface that has been measured to within 2/10,000ths of an inch or a thousandth of an inch, whatever the tolerance is. There is no room for misinterpretation if you're just looking at what it is and what state it is in. And it's unambiguous in a way. And it's kind of like you can debate an idea, you can debate, different philosophies and different events that occurred in history. But when it comes to, the engineering, there's very little debate when it's just like, okay, what is it? Measure it. Okay, here, I measured it. This is what I got. Well, I want to measure it. Okay, so somebody else measures it. And you have these, and that's what's been going on lately in terms of the ancient Egyptian artifacts. Is that I've identified some artifacts, and other people are going in and measuring it, and then other people go behind them and take their measures and record what they got. It's quite an exciting period, really, for revelation in terms of our ancient history, and it's a lot different than the story that we've been told.
Now, so you're saying that today's technology and today's engineers, it is
Yeah.
capable of creating something similar to the Great Pyramids, correct?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, there are features in the Great Pyramid that we're not aware of, we don't know, because of obviously you'd have to take the whole thing apart in order to
Right.
in order to find out exactly everything. And so there's a big question mark in my mind in terms of the weight of some of the blocks on the inside. From the outside, you can see that they're within the range that we would be able to move. But what are they on what are they in the core masonry? How large are those? I mean, are they 50 tons, 200 tons, 300 tons? When you look at the ancient cultures, they were moving some extremely large and heavy blocks of stone.
So
And
so let me ask you this though. If there was a 300-ton pillar inside,
yeah, right.
can we move 300 tons at one time?
I would, I am not the expert on on cranes and lifting
Yeah,
and
sure.
and rigging and stuff like that, but I would have to get somebody who is an expert at it. But I mean, I
Sure.
know that there are cranes that out there that can lift, thousands of tons. So it's not like we can't lift anything like that.
No, of course, of course. So then the thing, and I agree with you. I don't disagree with what you're saying. But the thing is that it would take almost all of our might, all of our engineers, all of our technology to even attempt to recreate something like that. And even then, there's still mysteries on certain things that we just truly don't know inside unless you take the whole thing apart. So if we're saying that in this not argument, but in this conversation, how the hell did they do it without all of the stuff that we're talking, yeah, cranes and technology and computer modeling and all of this stuff. Yeah, sure, we could do it, but these guys were doing. There was none of that then. So that's the big $1 billion question. How'd they build it, Chris?
Yes, and the thing is that we generally are not allowed to consider or to even imagine what they could have had that is outside what is visible in the archaeological record. So, in other words, when it comes to explaining how the pyramids were built, generally, I would say academic scholars are limited in what they can imagine in terms of how they were built, how they were cut, and how they were shaped. So with those limitations, and even independent researchers like myself would prefer that I limit myself to the advice of archaeologists and Egyptologists when it comes to coming up with my ideas, and that's putting constraints on somebody, and well, number one, uh, it doesn't work in the manufacturing field. If you want progress in society, you have to take the barriers down, right? In order for progress to occur. If you've got somebody who has a different idea in manufacturing, generally they're allowed to test it. Or they can argue that idea and be allowed to test it. And that's how progress has been made over the last, well, forever, really. I mean, but particularly over the last 100 years or so. Well, you go back to the Industrial Revolution and how manufacturing took place then, and then you look at it today, it's like night and day. So, the progress is absolutely amazing. And, without it, you wouldn't have cell phones won't exist, you know, uh, headphones that you're wearing.
Yeah, exactly. But Chris, let me ask you this, and this is something I've talked to with other archaeologists, is that when they look to the past, they only look through the lens of the technology that we have currently. They can't comprehend of a different kind of technology that we haven't developed. I mean, it's not all technology is going to go down one timeline, one pathway. There's multiple ways, like a new technology of how to move stone or carve stone or melt
Right.
stone and reform it, or using sound in one way or shape or form. All that stuff, they can't comprehend it because it's not within their toolbox of reference. Is that the problem with archaeology as a general statement? Like looking back, they just can't, figure out if it's not in the archaeological record, like you said. Well, hell, in 10,000 years, most of everything around me is going to be gone. All of this is
Well,
going to
that's
be
true. Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
All of it.
Well,
So only thing that will be left will be stone and some styrofoam.
yeah. I mean, I've always said when you look at the pyramids in Egypt, it's like, just the skeleton of a civilization. But to your point in terms of technological progress and what we allow ourselves to even consider in terms of how the ancient Egyptians did their work, we're looking at just a small sliver of time compared to, just the Egyptian civilization was supposed to be 3,000 years.
Yes.
And and the interesting thing is, in that 3,000 years, they were using the same methods and tools at the end of the 3,000 years that they were using at the beginning. So they had not progressed in terms of developing their tools, which is, it doesn't make sense, particularly when you look at the brilliance of their products. And then when you actually, to your point, which I think is a great point, when you look into the future, can't you imagine the same kind of progress in technology and our abilities as we've had in the last 100 years? Because the last 100 years, it's been unbelievable
Hmm.
progress in technology. I mean, just the invention of the transistor, and what it has brought us is just
Mhm.
unbelievable. So you have that. And then, you know, when I was writing Giza, the Tesla connection, it was like I was in two worlds. I was in the past and I was in the future. But here I am, you know, looking in the past and then trying to project in the future. And to your point on, can't you imagine what could be available in the future? There is one touchstone. I call it a touchstone, but it's kind of like something that should inspire everybody, and that is the function of these UAPs, right? In the atmosphere. I mean, they are displaying incredible feats with of speed, seemingly impervious to the gravitational field of the planet. They can drop down from 80,000 feet to sea level in just a few seconds and zoom off at 1,000 miles an hour and turn on a dime. So it's kind of like they have something that we don't have because we cannot match that performance. But if we could, what we should be working on is trying to control gravity and its effect on what we create and the environment that we like. If we sit in a craft, the craft and ourselves should have its own gravitational field that is separate from and independent of the Earth's gravitational field. So you know, it's kind of things like that that I think should inspire people to say, "Wow, yeah, it is quite possible that the ancient Egyptians were using, you know, gravity defeating techniques to move 500 tons, 1,200 ton blocks, you know, of stone, and so they could do it so easily that the Great Pyramid could have been built fairly quickly." Personally, I mean, uh, I think I saw an interview with Elon Musk, and he said that anti-gravity would not be a reality in his lifetime. I would prefer, I would want him to change his mind about that and say, "Damn it, I'm gonna prove it and build it." So you know, because the situation now, Alex, if you look at the politics of it, we're hell bent on going all electric, but we don't have the capacity. We don't have the power plants to. I mean, if we would go all electric by 2035, we can't build power plants fast enough to power all those vehicles. So you have a situation there where, you know, it may sound like a you know, a reasonable goal in terms of the climate, but that's a political issue I don't want to really get into. But given that, just the means of delivering electricity to these vehicles, and we seem to be kind of in this mindset that in order for electricity to be delivered to the motors of an electric vehicle, you need a very large battery, you know, a high capacity battery. And so, you know, that's one mindset. I think the a better one would be to actually deliver electricity to them wirelessly. So if you have a vehicle, electric vehicle, it's receiving power from stations wirelessly. It doesn't have a huge battery on board. That will be, and then, you know, you take that and you're able to control gravity, then the vehicle will not need as much power to move.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe that's in our future. I mean, in 100 years, 50 years, 100 years, I don't know. But you know, all it takes would be one breakthrough.
Well, let me ask you this because that's a very interesting question because you were talking about the 29th parallel. Well, there's not only just one pyramid in that parallel. There is a lot of pyramids around the world. It happens to be
Yeah,
around that area, which is in all Indonesia, Japan, China, and obviously the Mesoamerica area as well. So the theory is, and this is, and a lot of people before would think of this theory as tinfoil hat theory. People wearing tinfoil hats and like, oh, this is insanity. That there was a power kind of grid on the planet, and
Right.
somehow this magically worked, even though there's no real proof of anyone talking to each other. But yet these pyramids keep popping up all over the place, and yet they're all around the same area. So there's that kind of mysterious aspect to it. Your hypothesis or your theory is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Great Pyramid was a power station and that there is
Yeah.
that it generated electricity. Can you dive that in a little bit deeper? And then also, how is it connected to Tesla? Not the car, the
Yeah.
person.
Yes.
I have to make that
Yes.
distinction nowadays.
No. That's fine. Well, my first book was the Giza Power Plant, and in that book, I kind of laid out the mechanics of the Great Pyramid and provided reasons for the different features on the inside, how they functioned, and things like that. But on a broader scale, uh, I was just dealing with the Great Pyramid, but on a broader scale, you've got a lot of pyramids. I mean, there's over 120 in Egypt alone, and there's more than that in China. So there are pyramids all over the world. And so the question then becomes, were they all doing the same thing? And I think fundamentally they were. It's just that the Great Pyramid, they put in a little extra sauce, and souped it up a little bit. But but it's kind of like the energy for these pyramids is underneath our feet. That is the key point to think about. And there is a NASA physicist. His name was Friedemann Freund, and he had been researching earthquake lights, and his objective was to hopefully provide the underlying physics for why earthquake lights appeared or how they appeared before an earthquake. So what he had concluded and proven in his lab experiments was that igneous rock, when it is put under stress, it emits these positive Hall charge carriers that shoot up to the surface. So you've got and he said that the Earth, the lithosphere, when it's put under stress, turns into a battery. So we actually have a potential battery under our feet. So the purpose for the pyramids, in my opinion, was to actually attract the electrons from that battery and radiate them out wirelessly. And that's where you have two of Nikola Tesla's technologies. One of his technologies was the earthquake machine. It was a mechanical oscillator that if you attached it to a building, it would drive vibrations into a structure. The structure, in this case, is the Earth, and then the pyramid itself above. The other technology that he described was the wireless distribution of electricity through. He had built this Wardenclyffe Tower. They call it Wardenclyffe Tower, but it was supposed to radiate electricity into the atmosphere. And then you would have a device that was remote. It was delivered wirelessly to this device, and you would be able to connect with the Earth and with the atmosphere and draw electricity into that device. So there is that aspect of Tesla. But I think it's Freund's work and what he has shown and proven through lab experiments that is probably the most important discovery of the century. It needs to receive more attention. Now, of course, I've met Freud a couple of times. Lovely, lovely old man. Very, very smart guy. Uh, but he had no interest in the pyramids. He wasn't trying to prove anything about the pyramids, right?
Mhm.
And then I came along, and suddenly his eyes start getting wider when I'm talking about, hey, you may have discovered the physics behind solving the world's energy crisis. One of the things that we have done is we have used the same kind of technology for power generation uh, for the last over 100 years. So you go back to the steam age, right? And basically, we're burning coal, boiling water, and motivating mechanical devices with steam. And now we have these turbines, power plants. Basically, you burn, you boil, you have steam, you blow these turbine blades, and then you draw off electrons from the generators. So that kind of technique has been used not just with coal, but gas and also nuclear. And so, I make the comment in my book that while we have made quantum leaps in advancement on how electrons function within a device, the basic technology to deliver the electrons to that device has stayed the same for over 100 years. And then the other point I made, which kind of surprised me when I figured it out, in 2021 they had mined enough coal in the United States for the power plants to build a pyramid 76 times the size of the Great Pyramid. So that is a huge pyramid. That's a lot of coal.
Chris, but let me ask you though, even if this technology of the battery in the earth and looking at what the pyramids did, let's say we could get something like this up and running. Let's say
Right.
you and I, we go out, we like, hey, I think we figured this out. We build we build a small little, little power station, and we start proving it to everybody. Hey, look, you could do this for that. Do you think
Right.
the powers that be would ever allow that? I mean, it seems like when you were saying what you just said, you're like, it really has not changed for 100 years. I'd argue even longer than that because we've been burning fire for the
Yeah. Yeah.
for energy
Yeah.
for forever.
Yeah.
So it's all been just different variations of the same technology, more advanced, more this, more that, but it's basically the same technology. Kind of like iPhone 5 versus iPhone 15. Similar
Right.
technology. It's a similar tech. But to do this kind of giant leap, do you even think that would be allowed by the powers that be? Because if there's free energy, well, hell, there's no money in that.
Well, it's not free. I mean,
You
obviously,
know what I mean? You
it'd
know
be
what I
a
mean.
hell of
No,
an investment. I
yeah,
think the
yeah.
return investment would be great. That's the thing. Powers that be, that involves a lot of politics, and so
Yeah.
what is the political climate
Mm,
for developing new sources of energy? And I would say right now the political climate is pretty good.
yeah.
It may not have been 50 years ago, but right now the way politics is going, that I think a serious consideration for Freud's discovery and his physics should be made, and something along the lines of a Manhattan Project engaged in to actually prove it, because he's already done the math, he's already done the physics, he's done the lab experiments. The lab experiments have been replicated in a lab in Japan, so it's not like he's just a single guy, and his methods have been checked and not proven to be right.
Hmm. Hmm.
They've been proven to be correct, and so that's there. And in terms of, okay, so what kind of a structure do you build? How do we prove this out? Well, you do it a little at a time, right? You're not going to build a Great Pyramid right away. You, you'll start off small and basically work your way up. But it's definitely I think a research program that could have a lot of value.
Now, in your book, you also talk about acoustical science. Can you kind of delve into what that means and how it relates to
Oh, the
the Great
acoustics,
Pyramid?
yeah. Well, when it's basically it's the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, and the interior has always been recognized as having extraordinary acoustics. There has been research done by several people on the inside of the Great Pyramid. One of them was a musician. So musicians love the Great Pyramid. They love to get inside the Great Pyramid, right? Well, my research associate, Robert Vorter, he's a sound engineer, and so he has studied the Great Pyramid for many years too. And we'd been in Egypt together a couple of times. We went in 2018, 2019, and he took some measurements inside the Grand Gallery, and he wrote an appendix for my book, which is a very nice appendix. Essentially, what it is saying is that inside the Great Pyramid, the Great Pyramid is like a huge musical instrument with the proportions, the resonance, the way sound moves through it. It's quite remarkable. That is the acoustical science behind it. Now, as far as taking it to like a PhD level acoustic uh, examination and study, I got close to that with a PhD physicist, and then things kind of fell apart and it didn't go any further with him. But I think it would be a great project for a graduate student at a university to just model the Great Pyramid interior, just to study the acoustics on the inside at a higher level than just anecdotal kind of information that's gathered from it.
Now, is there a connection between the power generation theory of the Great Pyramid with the acoustical aspects of it? Is there something that is working together? There has to have been a reason for these acoustics. So what do you think
Yeah.
they are?
Well, it's just that it's the resonance. If you look at the dimensions of the Great Pyramid and compare them to the Earth, they're like an integer of the Earth, and the frequency of sound that resonates within the Great Pyramid is the same as the frequency of sound from the Earth. So the F sharp is predominant. An F sharp and an A is predominant inside the Great Pyramid as well as the Earth. So you do have a resonating body, and I called it a coupled oscillator with the Earth. A coupled oscillator will oscillate in frequency and time with a larger vibrating body. And as long as that large vibrating body continued to vibrate, then the oscillator would continue to draw energy from it. And so the Great Pyramid, being a coupled oscillator, is drawing mechanical energy out of the Earth, as well as electrical energy.
Chris, let me ask you, because on this show we talk a lot about spirituality and ancient texts and things like that in regards to frequency and
Right.
vibration, which has been hijacked by the New Age movement in many ways. But
Yeah.
the more and more I talk to different, astrophysicists, quantum physicists, all, NASA rocket scientists, all sorts of people that I've spoken to, frequency keeps coming up. And
Mhm.
it's almost that frequency on a spiritual standpoint, we understand at least that frequency is fundamental to
Mhm.
everything in life, whether that be just energies between two human beings, energies between or frequencies between places. Like you walk onto a place where there's been a lot of death, you feel it. You walk
Right.
into a place that has a lot of life, you feel it. It's
Right.
unexplainable, but you feel
Right.
it. It sounds what you're explaining is that frequency has a tremendous amount to do with what the Great Pyramid is all about in general in regards to its ability to possibly power as a power plant, but
Right.
just everything about it as frequency seems to be a thing. Because I haven't been to the Great Pyramid, but I have been to Chichen Itza. And when I was
Yeah.
at I was in Chichen Itza. You've been, I'm assuming.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so Chichen Itza, you stand in front of those kind of pyramids and you feel it. And there's this little thing that every time I talk to an archaeologist about it, they kind of wave it away like, oh, it's just nice. You stand in front of the steps at a certain place and you clap.
All
The
right.
clap goes all the way to the top and comes all and echoes all the way back down perfectly for you. And it sounds like apparently some sort of bird that's
Yeah. Heard
there.
about that. Right.
Yeah, you've heard about that, right? And I did it. It's absolutely fascinating. So again,
Yeah.
my question is frequency really at the core of a lot of the ideas and theories that you're talking about within the Great Pyramid?
100%. Absolutely. It wouldn't function without it. So frequency and harmonics is central to pretty much everything. And it's not just, the frequency, it's also it's the blending of different frequencies to combine to actually create more power. And that's where you get into nonlinear acoustics. But the frequencies within the Great Pyramid are really fascinating. We're just beginning to learn more about that. One of the things that you do get is in the Grand Gallery, particularly, you have an arrangement of corbels. So the Grand Gallery is like 175 feet long. It's on a 26.5-degree angle, but the walls step inwards as it gets higher. And in my book, I proposed that was used. They had actually installed resonators in the Grand Gallery, and those resonators would draw mechanical vibrations that were passing through the pyramid and convert them to airborne sound. One of the phenomena within the Grand Gallery, its relationship with the King's Chamber, and when Paul Horn, who was a musician, he played the flute. He created a recording called "Inside the Great Pyramid," and he had noted that the King's Chamber had a very, very long reverberation time, and the Grand Gallery was rather flat. And he noted in a pamphlet that he included with his LP. He issued his LP back in the late 70s, I think. And so what he noted was that the sound, he played his flute in the Grand Gallery. The sound went out into the Grand Gallery, and it echoed in the King's Chamber. So it was actually being focused into the King's Chamber. And so the King's Chamber uh, is comprised of granite, right? And there are certain features of the King's Chamber that suggest that it too was, designed to resonate at particular frequencies. And so frequency and harmony is central to the entire function of the pyramid, just like it would be a musical instrument and even a human. So here's an interesting snippet. I received an email from a composer out on the West Coast. Her name was Susan Alexander, and she had read the Giza Power Plant, my first book, and she had done research with a Dr. David Deamer on the frequencies of DNA and composed music based on those frequencies. Of course, those frequencies were extremely high, and she stepped them down into the range of human hearing. but then she composed some music based on them. And the frequencies, and she told me in her email that the frequencies that were dominant in the King's Chamber. I described the King's Chamber as an F sharp chord, and she said that those were dominant in human DNA. So it's not just frequency and harmony of the pyramids, but also the Earth, but also human beings. And so that is another concept that is absolutely really incredible if you consider, if we were able to achieve it, that our engineering projects, what we engineer in the future, will actually function and be in harmony with the Earth and also with humans. Can you?
I mean, it's very, very Pollyannic of you, sir, but I would love that as well. Could you imagine?
Well, you know, if you dream it, that you know it can happen. But
Absolutely.
but it's true. I mean, if you're around a noisy refrigerator, it's jarring. You know, the frequencies are jarring on your nerves, right? Or an air conditioner or something like that. So it's like, okay, engineers, can you kind of tune your equipment to human DNA, you know, make it more pleasant.
So, yes, that would be fascinating. Well, speaking of frequency and this technology, Tesla. I mean, Tesla. Obviously, this book is a lot about the Tesla connection. How did Tesla, if you can't even find this information out, but how did Tesla connect this technology with his work? Did he visit the Great Pyramids? Did he analyze it? Did he study them? How did he come up with these ideas that were so revolutionary and are still revolutionary to this day?
Yes, and you know that is seems to be a recent phenomena that Tesla. I've seen some videos that claim that Tesla was inspired by the Great Pyramid, but I've talked to people who are, you know, Tesla scholars, or you know, they've followed his work. They had all his writings, and I can't find any reference or um, anything, whether it's a newspaper report or anything where Tesla was talking about the Great Pyramid. I mean, certainly, if he had known about the Great Pyramid, about what has been revealed over the years, he may have been inspired by it. But if he was, he didn't really talk about it that much. So I don't know. I can't confirm that story. Um,
But
but
but obviously the connection is that he was doing similar work that connects to the theories of what the Great Pyramid is, correct?
he was talking about Earth energies and transmitting power through the Earth, and so there is that aspect to it. While the wireless distribution of energy. Now, as far as the Great Pyramid and its relationship with the Earth and it drawing energy from the Earth, there wasn't any discussion of that before the Giza power plant was published. And people talked about pyramid energy as though it was this mystical kind of, you know, woo-woo kind of thing. And but there was nothing before the Giza power plant that actually described a mechanical system that showed that these processes could have been taking place. I'm more convinced now that they were taking place, but that's thanks to Friedemann Freund and his work.
Another billion-dollar question for you, Chris. When were these pyramids built? Because it doesn't
Hmm?
seem like it was done. When were these pyramids built?
Oh,
It doesn't seem like it was built 3,000 years ago, and the technology didn't move for 3,000 years, which makes absolutely no sense in human history. That's not the way we work. There are theories
yeah.
now. There are theories now with Graham Hancock's work and many people like that they talk about that these pyramids could have been there 12,000, 14,000 years ago, and that the Egyptians came across them, because that's one of the explanations of how it seemed like the pyramids got worse as time went on, as opposed to it
Yeah.
usually gets better. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
You know, I've always held the view that I can't answer when and by whom the pyramids were built. I'm just dealing with the how and why they were built.
Mm.
And so I deal with those. I'm fairly solid ground. So essentially, I can say if you can place them 4,500 years ago, that's fine. I don't care. They could have
It's
been,
irrelevant to you. It's
built
irrelevant
30
to your
years
work.
ago.
Yeah,
It's,
exactly. It's irrelevant to your
it's
work.
irrelevant
Yeah, but
on any continent, right? It's kind of like, okay, all right. So,
it makes it a lot more. Look, if it was built 30 years ago, oh, impressive.
right.
Built 15,000 years ago, a lot more impressive, because that opens up a whole can
Well,
of
I
worms.
mean, I mean, that may be a rather cowardly approach by me. I just don't want to get into that
No,
embroiled
of
in
course,
argument,
of
right?
course, of
Like
course, of course.
I have enough to deal with on the engineering and
Sure.
futuristic kind of.
No,
Uh,
of course, of course.
no, but seriously, no, you're right. If you go back to 4,500 years ago, it's like, yeah, no, it doesn't seem right that they were built at that time because they just didn't have the tools to do it. Whether and you know what would cause the infrastructure, just the infrastructure to build those pyramids in Egypt, and the machines that is apparent that are apparent in being used for some of the artifacts that they created. Uh, you have to go back, I think, yeah, probably 10 to 12,000 years. You know, I mean, if they talk about the Younger Dryas impact or coronal mass ejections and, you know, destruction of the planet, cataclysmic events, all of those would cause a advanced civilization to be reduced to rubble and no hope of rebuilding. I mean, you know, you talk about our civilization and how we are supported with our technology. Wouldn't take much for us to be thrown back to the medieval times, you know.
I was about to say that too. Like, it doesn't take, I live here in Austin. There's some power outages out here. And my God, if a
People
day
freak
without,
out.
people lose their collective minds. They just have no idea what to do. And I have friends of mine who are from third world countries. They're like, that was daily work. We had a power outage every day. Like, they just get used to it. But modern society, it really is one or two events away, and it's one event away, really. Our power grid goes out, everything, the whole world, just nothing to do. You can't
Yeah, I
move.
mean, you look at the supply chain. Your
Oh,
electric cars, where does your lithium come from, right? For your
oh
batteries
man.
in those electric cars. So yeah, I mean, we happily go forward designing all these marvelous new technologies, and we're not doing anything about the infrastructure to support them.
You know what's interesting? When you just said that, came to me like, yeah, we're building all this lovely technology, where we're building it on very old energy technology. And that's
Yes.
the problem. We have very advanced as advanced as we know that we've had on this planet, but the
Mhm.
technology to run it all is barbaric. You're
Right.
burning
Right.
coal to
Right.
steam water to move. I mean, this is the same thing that was going on hundreds of years ago. The steam engine, and then before that, it was literally around the fire with our ancestors. So
Yeah.
there's no advancement in energy production, but there's a massive advancement in AI and computer technologies and all these other
Right.
things. So we need to start focusing on building a new way to generate electricity and energy in a very not only sustainable way, but in a way that matches the technology that we're creating. Because it seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if the Great Pyramid actually was a power plant, and the theories that you and that NASA scientist proved, that if you stress igneous rock, it creates these. You're basically creating electricity from the earth, and the earth is it's a battery. That seems pretty stable. I mean, there's no storm's gonna knock that out. There's no one's gonna trip on a wire. I still look around and I see power lines hanging from the 60s. I mean, there's the poles are from the 50s and 60s still. They're wooden poles. I'm like, my guy feels pretty barbaric. So it seems pretty robust. We don't have a robust energy technology, do
Right,
we?
right. Just the building a coal power plant. The lead time on building a coal power plant would be what, 10 years or more. And the costs are outrageous. Nuclear, I mean, the politics involved, so it's like, the real powerhouses for electricity are the old coal and nuclear power plants. Of course, there is solar now, and
And
well,
wind, solar, and
well,
hydro. Yeah, and
yeah,
hydro.
and hydro, but they fulfill a small percentage of our power needs. It's still coal, nuclear, and gas turbine. But you have an electron harvester
Right here, exactly, right
right
here we
here
do.
as an electron harvester, right?
Is this ever going to get turned back on? Is there a way? Is that a thing? Or is this just a shell of what it was?
Oh, that's a good question.
Can it be? Can the pyramid be turned back on? I mean, because imagine
The
five
first
thousand years
one,
from now, 5,000 years ago, you open up a power plant. A lot of the bolts are falling off. There's no way to turn it back on. Would you agree? Is there a way to turn it back on?
I was asked that same question by a senior Egyptian official. Asked me that question at a meeting with coffee. I gave him a copy of my book, The Giza Power Plant. My current one wasn't published but at that time. This was in 2021. So I had coffee with him, and he was the supervisor over the Scan Pyramid mission team.
Okay.
And then at the meeting was it was an international law judge, Hamada Anwar, who represented Egypt's legal interests in the whole Scan Pyramid, and they still are. So Hani Halal, who is Dr. Hani Halal, he's actually an engineer himself, so we got along. And I gave him, I described the Giza power plant to him, and he asked me the same question you did. Well, could you repair the current pyramid and get it functioning again? I was kind of blown away by that, right? It's kind of like this is something that I didn't expect. I never expected I'd be sitting having coffee with an Egyptian official and them asking me if I could turn on the Great Pyramid again.
Times have changed, sir.
And well, can you get it running again? And I was like, and so, I didn't want to say hell no. I mean, it'd be impossible. But before that question was asked by him, that was my conclusion, because there was too much damage on the inside. This was my thought process. There's so much that we don't know about it. Um, and to just say, oh yeah, we'll just close it up and get it running again, turn the key, and off we go. It's much more involved than that. But then when I was writing my book and I was thinking about, okay, let me really think about that question. If you've you've proven the science, you've demonstrated what is possible to be released from the lithosphere in terms of electricity, electrons, and then you're going to build another great pyramid in, say, Texas, right? Say we're going to build a pyramid in Marfa, Texas. They got all kinds of earth lights around that area, right? And say, okay, we're going to build a pyramid in Texas. Well, okay, well, we have to quarry uh, 6 million tons of limestone and granite. And the Great Pyramid has already got 5.5 million tons of stone already in place. And so the material resources for building a Great Pyramid are already there, right? It just needs to be repaired. And it needs to be somewhat taken apart to be able to understand it more fully, such as the big void in the above the Grand Gallery. That's supposed to be, something the same size as the Grand Gallery. I'm not sure, but when they found that, people were asking me, "Well, what do you think? What is this big void above the Grand Gallery? Does it fit within your theory? What?" And I was like, "Well, I'm gonna have to. I need more information." Because all we get is like a point cloud, and they're very, very scattered points, and there's no geometric definition to it, which is, not surprising considering the muon method that they were using. So, but then I get a call from an engineer friend of mine, Eric Wilson, and he said, "Well, I know what that big void's for." And oh, you do you? Well, please tell me. He said, and he said, "Well, your model needs a preamp, and that would serve as a preamp for the
Wow.
microwaves coming into the King's chamber." And I was like,
Whoa.
"Okay, all right, that's that'll work."
Chris, I want to ask you something. I know that, you've been doing this for a long time now, and you're the stone that got dropped into the pond, and the ripples have been sent out ever since that first book came out. Is it your hope that someone else picks up your research and takes this down to the finish line in the next 50 or 100 years?
Oh, they already have.
There's people who are already going.
Yeah, they're already on it. Yes, in different areas. I mean, it's not just on the Great Pyramid itself, but also other areas. In terms of, for instance, the study of machined artifacts in Egypt. The Egyptians are now doing their own metrology studies of these artifacts to determine their true nature, or to actually verify what I indicated in my books. To prove me right or wrong, but they're doing it themselves. There's an engineer in Egypt. His name is Ahmed Adli. He has a YouTube channel, and he has created a lot of different videos discussing the advanced machining in ancient Egypt. And he has followed my footsteps in Egypt, and been into the Serapeum, studied the statues at Luxor. And many other different artifacts that I point out, and actually proving, saying that I was correct in my observations. Now he wrote the foreword for my new book, and he also, in his foreword, he talked about a Egyptian physicist who had read my book and also agrees with it in terms of the function of the Great Pyramid. And there seems to be a quiet revolution going on in Egypt now, particularly young people who could have cared less about the whole tomb theory. They are becoming tremendously interested in lost technologies and the true nature of their ancestors' capabilities. So, thanks for that question. That was
Of course. Of
I
course.
mean, I could die tomorrow. It's going to continue. That's
Now, and you said something about the Luxor, which just triggered something in me, that they're the obelisks that are in
yeah,
Egypt,
yeah,
and the obelisks that are everywhere. When I was traveling through Europe, there was an obelisk in every town. There was an obelisk there's an obelisk at the Vatican. There was an
yeah.
obelisk in Milan. There was an obelisk in Rome.
Yeah.
They're everywhere, and obviously, and they're Egyptian too. On top of some, they have Egyptian hieroglyphs in many of them,
Right, right.
and they're here. I mean, we have a giant obelisk in Washington,
Yeah,
but
there's one in
there's a
Paris, one in
yeah,
Lisbon, there's one
yeah,
in Constantinople. Yeah,
they're
they
everywhere. How does were they? this is just me throwing a theory out there. I'm sure I'm not the first to say it, but was it like, were they relay stations, if you will? Did it have anything to do with the power aspect of the Great Pyramid?
You know, that's a really good question. And for a long time, I kind of dismissed that idea that they
Mhm.
were relay stations. I'm a little more um, open to it now because of the work of Freund and what has been demonstrated in terms of the generation and transmission of electricity through igneous rock. So you have these standing spears all around Egypt, and you know, besides just being, landmarks and interesting features, I think maybe they also did perform another function. How that is now being played out in terms of the physics and science behind it, there is a study of the what used to be the fallen obelisk at Luxor
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
terms of its capabilities in creating and transmitting sound. And this is being done by a group called the Geocosmo Group. My friend Robert Walter, the sound engineer, who passed away last year, unfortunately, he's working
Mm.
with one of the members of that group in in preparing a paper for publication. And they've come up with some very interesting observations in their studies. I can't release anything because the paper hasn't been published yet, but I can say that it is being worked on. So yeah, there's a lot more to learn through the whole process. Um, and certainly I've always considered myself to be a pointer, and it's like I point at this and say, hey, we need to look a little closer at this. You guys check this out. So I'm a pointer. I go around and I point things out, and I think, well, I did some cursory examination of this. I use simple instruments. I'm finding this, and this. Um, it needs to be checked out. Today, we have greater technology than I had when I started this
Hmm.
research in terms of measurements.
Sure.
So there is scanning going on, laser scanning, CT scanning, structured light scanning of ancient artifacts, and what is being revealed is pretty mind blowing.
Chris, I could talk to you for another 7 to 10 days about this stuff. This is amazing. But can you tell people where they can find out more about you, your work, and pick up a copy of your new book, Giza, the Tesla Connection?
Yes, I mean, I have a website. It's gizapower.com, and the book is obviously available at all brick and mortar bookstores. If it's not on the shelf, it can be ordered through them, and then the online bookstores too.
And Chris, do you have any parting messages for the audience in regards to lost technologies, being curious, investigating life? Anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, don't stay lost too long. The no,
I love that one. That's a great quote.
I no, I have a little story I'd like to tell you, right? This is
Please,
set
please.
sometime in the future,
Okay.
all right? And so this farmer walks into a bar in Texas. It's an old dusty old town, right? Walks into a bar. The bar farmer goes up to the bar. The bartender says, "What are you having?" "I'll have I'll have a Lone Star." Sits down. Bartender wants to make small talk. "So, what do you do for a living?" "I'm a farmer." He's, and well, okay, great. Well, that was a hell of a storm we had last week. Did you get any damage? "No, no problem." And the bartender says, "Well, there's going to be another one coming through next week. You better batten down the hatches." And farmer says, "Not bothered. Won't affect me." Finishes the beer, climbs off the stool. The farmer straightens his shirt and starts walking towards the door. And the bartender shouts out after her and says, "What do you farm anyway?" And she says, Electrons. Bumper crop this year.
Well, you know what?
Ah,
It's very similar to Star Wars. The farmer that Luke is his aunt and uncle were humidity farmers, or they basically they sucked the water out of the air, and that was their harvest
oh,
because they
yeah.
lived in a desert.
They're harvesting water. Yeah.
Moisture, something or other. So it's not that far fetched, sir. These ideas are floating in the ether. So I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Chris, it's been such a pleasure and honor speaking to you, my friend. Thank you again so much for not only being on the show, but for all the amazing work that you've done over the years and helping shed some light to some of some of the ancient world's mystery. So I appreciate you, my friend.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex.